So hello and welcome to this first session of the summit. And while we discuss, we invite you to put your questions in the chat box and also maybe indicate who you would like to direct them to. And we will give time to the panelists to respond in the second part of the session. So with me here to have this conversation around those three intersecting crises that we are facing are three distinguished colleagues from three of our partner organizations. So first, I would like to welcome Stefan Van Dijk. He's the Director of Innovation at the AMS Institute, which is an internationally leading institute educating engineers, designers, natural and social scientists, and developing integrated metropolitan solutions. And Stefan told us that he greatly believes that in urban mobility transitions, frequent, open and early stage interactions between industry, cities and knowledge institutes on the large mobility transitions in cities really accelerates innovations and creates impact and broad societal value, leading to a more sustainable and livable city. So welcome, Stefan.
Thanks.
Then we have Jaromír Beránek. He's the chairman of the IT and Smart City Committee of the Prague City Assembly. So Jaromír believes that Prague, to be a smart city, must help citizens and visitors to lead an easier everyday life while saving resources at the same time. This requires all of us to become smarter. We need to learn from the best and win the citizens over for new ideas. Even if that sometimes means that people will at first hate us for changes we make, but will eventually never want to go back to how it was before. Welcome, Jaromír.
Good morning, it's a great pleasure.
Thanks. So, finally, we have Andrés Camacho. He's the Director of Mobility at Ferrovial, one of the world's leading infrastructure operators and municipal service companies. And Andrés is convinced that although we might think that the changes currently taking place in the urban mobility space are radical, this is just an appetizer of the changes the future will bring. Cities, citizens, industry, academia all need to work in a true collaborative manner to define how we want this revolution to unfold. Welcome, Andrés.
Thank you, Maria.
So let's start with how we tackle the ambition targets moving towards climate neutrality. So we have a target of, the EU has a target of reducing CO2 emissions by 55% by 2030 and reaching carbon net neutrality by 2015. So a very ambitious target. So I would like to ask first Jaromír. So from your perspective, what are the three main challenges to achieve a fully decarbonized urban mobility, but also the three main sources of optimism that we can achieve that?
Thank you for the question, Maria. I think this is a very, very broad topic and it's really difficult to find a starting point. But from my perspective and from the perspective of the city of Prague, the main concern is that our energetical mix in the Czech Republic is not ready to switch over to carbon-free or, if you want, carbon-less economy. So first and foremost, we need to switch our energetic system to a more sustainable one, meaning that we have to implement more wind and solar power. Unfortunately, we do not have any waves or sea in the Czech Republic, so we have to rely on the existing technologies and hope maybe for the fuse in the nuclear energy area. But that's a song of future decades, not years. Second, and also a very important issue and concern that we have to tackle is to persuade the citizens of the city and as well as the visitors of the city to start preferring other ways of moving around the city compared to what they prefer to use today. I'm not talking just about individual cars or vehicles. I'm also talking about being motivated to maybe every now and then consider if the trip that they have planned is really necessary. And the current pandemic shows that people can do and can be ready to do many of their daily routines from home or from other places. And third, and this would also not be the last concern, is that we, of course, need to get enough financial support for that. And it can be partly covered by the initiatives of the European Union, although sometimes it seems quite complicated, and in some instances even quite dramatic if we have to negotiate with our partners from other countries. But I think that we have to realize that in order to achieve the desired stay, there is a huge financial outlay at the beginning, and hopefully it will come back to us as a return on investment in 5 or maybe 10 years. And the sources of optimism, I might leave this question partly unanswered, but for me, the main sources of optimism is the passion, I would say, I can see with young people, with young generations. And when it comes to seeing elder people who are also very passionate and very confident about the new technologies, then I simply think that the world can be preserved as it is. We do not have to give up much of our comfort. And humanity as a species is not going to die out anytime soon.
Well, we all hope for that. Andres, I would like to ask you, so from a different perspective, so from the supplier perspective, more or less. So would you like to comment on challenges and, well, do we have hope to save the species?
We do. It will take time, and I think the challenges are different depending on which time frame we are talking about, no? But and which urban mobility or which city we are referring to in which country. But I mean, generally speaking, I think one of the challenges will be to reduce congestion. Okay, now with the COVID, we may think that congestion has disappeared, but it will come back. It will come back very strongly. So we need to reduce that. We need to generate green energy to power our vehicles, but we need to generate it and distribute this energy. So this electricity, this hydrogen, we don't have the infrastructure yet, and so that's going to take a lot of time, a lot of money. And then finally, more in a more tactical point, for the public transport, the mass transit, we need to decarbonize that, and that is very costly. So if we want all the buses and the different means of transport that cities use, it costs a lot of money. Okay, so we just need a huge investment there. But I'm quite optimistic. I think the transition to electric vehicles is now unstoppable. I really think so. Also, there are ways of tackling congestion that with the use of technology that are going to help us a lot. So, for example, things like congestion charging or pay for driving, etc. So we have that technology to manage congestion. And then finally, I'm very optimistic because now I see that citizens really want it. They really demand it. Okay, and so during the COVID, they experienced, at least here in Madrid where I live, they experienced like a whole new city, very clean, very livable, very, open, peaceful, smokeless, and they have seen it, and I think they want more. So I'm quite optimistic.
So Andres, maybe to follow up on that. So Jaromír, being from the city, so yes, people demand changes, but are they also ready to give up some of their comforts in the short run in exchange to have a better life in the more mid or long-term future?
I would say people are ready, definitely, to give up some of their comfort, but they do not know that for certain yet. Because in the end, if they see the positive outcomes, they can get easily persuaded. But in the short run, we see there is a huge opposition towards limiting car or cutting them out from being able to drive into the city center or pay even higher parking fees. Many people out there still believe that there is something like essential human right for free parking anytime and anywhere they want. But in the end, there is a clear win-win game, and that's the power of arguments that we have to put in place in order to win the people on our side. I'm not saying that this is the only side and this is the only argument out there, but I believe this one is the better option.
Okay, thanks. So a lot of things need to change, and we need obviously innovation, and this is what EIT Urban Mobility is about. So I would like to ask Stefan, so how does collaboration within the community actually support change and fit into this whole picture of we need to transform?
Yeah, so thanks, Maria, for this question. I think also what was mentioned by the other colleagues is that it's a big willingness to change also in society. And I think also if we look at how the impact has been of COVID, it means that the willingness to change and also the ability to change are actually there. Only the crisis has to be high enough. Unfortunately, with the decarbonization and climate change, it goes very slow. But in the end, we have the same kind of impact that we would see in the longer term. But there are a lot of hurdles to get all the innovations being implemented and adopted. And I think exactly in that spot, let's say, in that innovation space, collaboration is really essential. So if you could already start exchanging ideas and have interactions between the industry players, between the cities, and with knowledge institutes and citizens, you are much quicker in identifying what are the hurdles that have to be tackled in making innovations work. And also how people are able to deal with uncertainties still related to these innovations. And there has been a long tendency, I think, that we think, okay, innovations are really something that is for industries or universities at their campus. But as we've seen, I think the last 20 years, this approach of open innovation and having frequent interactions, it's really helping to move further, although it's not for every city, for instance, in the same context. But there also, I think, what you see with EIT Urban Mobility, working across Europe and European borders, you can also really achieve a scale of learning across these borders. And it's not easy, but I think it will really help and accelerate the innovations that we in the end need. It's really, I think, essential to get things moving.
Thanks, Stefan. So you mentioned cities as being key players in the innovation game. When we talk about innovation in urban mobility and new mobility services, a lot is clearly also connected with digitalization, and it will play an important role in the decarbonization of mobility. So a question to all of you, and maybe we can start with the city. So Jaromír on that. So how do you see the role of cities evolving regarding, for instance, management of data or access to new skilled workers in the digitalization area? And so what do you expect from cities to further accelerate this transformation?
What I expect from our city is that we will play a role model role, meaning that we will not hide us out from the challenges that are coming up, and there are many of them. We have seen a few examples over the past few years in the city of Prague, where we had clashes and collisions with the national regulation for data management, even though there were multiple interests on the part of the Prague Transit Authority or other companies that simply need the data, or they were used to have the data available for processing the individual's information, and maybe give a discount to a student for a subscription for an annual pass, or do other preferential treatment for specific citizen groups, which is simply not possible without having the data stored. What some people do not like, and what the National Regulation Authority also started to observe, is if all the data is really required and necessary. So this is why I'm saying that the city of Prague, but also many other major cities, need to play the role model role. And Prague is obviously not the only metropolis within the European Union, and we have built up and accumulated some advanced moves in specific areas, whereas in the others we are greatly lagging behind. And this one is also valid, I would say, for being able to attract the skilled workers in the area of IT or development or programming. the city as it is now, or this, I guess, is probably not just the case of the city of Prague, is in many instances not competitive enough to attract young and skilled workers that simply expect a relatively high pay. So for that purpose, we launched a new city-owned company, which is basically a joint stock company in order to pay the motivated and quality people a little bit more. We are still not as competitive as if those people were about to work for Microsoft or for global corporations headquartered elsewhere or even in the Czech Republic. But we have set a good standard, and I believe that we as a city have something to offer that the others do not, and that is an imminent and direct impact on our everyday lives. And this helps motivate people a lot from my experience. So if you show them that they can be part of the transformation process, they mostly like the idea, they are not scared, especially the young people, and they embrace the challenge. And I hope that also their friends or families will like what they are working for the society. So it's partly about, and this is also one of my messages for today, it's partly about having everybody engaged. This time is simply not leaving anyone who is connected to the internet behind, and we all can play a smaller or bigger role if we are into it.
Yeah, so that is a very interesting approach, and I really do hope that our young generation will be more purpose-driven as this generation. But I think there are signals that this is actually the case. So, Stefan, would you like to comment as well, and Andres?
Yeah, I can. I fully support the idea and the message put forward by Jaromír, and I think also so as a research institute based in Amsterdam, we are partly founded by the city of Amsterdam, and we work a lot together on let's say digital mobility management. How can we use the new data, the data that's been available, but also really the digital tools that are now being made available, also to benefit the cities and have a more inclusive approach to mobility. But what we have seen, I think, and that's also the city of Amsterdam really took a big step forward over the last 10 years. They invested themselves also in their own capabilities quite a lot in the realm of digitalization and ICT, so that they are also really a strong partner in dealing with all, let's say, developments from the market and from industry partners. And it also is really working that we have a lot of skilled people now joining the city and working from the city's perspective on the best tools to work and manage mobility flows, but also really focusing on what kind of principles do we really want to have being implemented in the design of new software or databases or data structures that we need, or data exchanges, so we can really comply with the fundamental, more democratic principles of city governance. And that's really aligned with it. It's a heavily institutionalized industry, the mobility sector, and also for good reasons, to have it inclusive and accessible for all citizens. And also how to deal with the data, and the data that's being collected by industry partners also has to be compliant with those principles. And I think City of Amsterdam, but also Barcelona and Helsinki and even New York are actually working on this, let's say, citizen rights in dealing with urban data and especially mobility data, because that's a data source that has been really big and where a lot of commercial partners have interest in to do stuff with, also relevant stuff. But it's really also here, the collaboration is essential. And I see that cities take a really proactive role now in defining what they are accepting in terms of data management and data exchange and the use of data.
So yeah, thanks, Stefan. So Anders, would you like to react to that?
Yes, from the private sector point of view, I think not trying to be controversial here, but I think that cities have it very difficult. No, it's a difficult for cities because changes, technological changes, societal changes are going so fast. And before, for a city to regulate or to manage urban mobility was about a better public transport and a more physical infrastructure. But those days are gone. I think you need more than that to regulate to have a sustainable urban mobility, no? And in addition to what you said about what my colleague said about technology, data, etc., I think for me the key skill that the cities need to have is the ability to regulate the whole ecosystem and to manage all the different stakeholders. It's not easy. It's not easy because you need to, as I said, there's technology, there are social rights, etc., etc., etc. So for me, to do that, and as Stefan said, you have to do it in a collaborative way. You cannot just regulate without taking into account, I don't know, one or another stakeholder. You really need to do it in a conjoint way. So for me, that's important also to give stability from a regulation point of view, so companies can invest, the public sector knows what it has to do, and citizens know what they are expecting. No?
So Jaromír, then what do you think should be the role of cities in regulating? So as Andres was mentioning, he sees there a great responsibility of the cities. Can you react on that, please?
I'm very pleased or positively surprised that a representative of the private sector says that the cities should have the right to regulate some sectors of the economy. For us, it has been a challenge over the past few years. Of course, it's now very different with the COVID-19 situations to regulate phenomena like Airbnb or other negative aspects of over-tourism, which is also the case of Amsterdam. I can easily imagine not that much of Madrid, but maybe of Barcelona and other Spanish cities. I'm now myself being in Spain, in the Canarias, and I can easily imagine what negative aspects or influences the over-tourism can bring to other sectors. But it's also about mobility and urban mobility in this context. And what we need to regulate and what we are not able to regulate is oftentimes some issue that is only imminent to a metropolitan area, to a big city like the city of Prague. And since we cannot really enact any laws on the city level, there are only local limitations. I don't know, maybe people will not be able to drink wine in the park after 10 p.m. or some really simple examples like this one. We are constantly in, I would say, a fight with the national level, with the national parliament, what they find important for other cities as well. And there's this, omnipresent clashing between the metropolitan areas and between the rest of the countries, many members of the parliament coming from smaller cities or towns. And they simply do not believe that a big city like Prague it needs help in certain areas. It's not just the Airbnb phenomenon that I mentioned in the beginning. So we are oftentimes left alone, and we need to explain everything 10 times more powerfully than the others in order to win the rest of the world for our case. And it's not an easy fight. I can imagine if it was up to us, people coming from larger cities, we would easily find a common ground than if we have to talk to our fellow citizens.
Right. So yeah, thanks a lot. I mean, that was very enlightening regarding the changing role of cities and also the importance of, cities teaming up with each other, but also in the ecosystem. And maybe we can move from cities to ecosystem collaboration overall and the role of citizens maybe also in that. So Stefan, how do you see that the ecosystem collaboration or importance of that is changing and especially the role of the citizens in innovation?
Yeah, thanks. So it's, I think over the last years, we've seen, at least in the environment where I work, that collaboration or ecosystem collaboration between, let's say, the industry players, also cities or governmental organizations, and also research and knowledge institutes and universities already quite well developed. But if you look at the urban mobility domain, then in the end, it's all also about the citizens and the end users that are in the city. And you want to make sure that innovations that usually in the first couple of years primarily tackle, let's say, more privileged groups within society that have higher incomes and are really fond of innovation, That's at least what we see in the Netherlands. That it's also being accessible and adoptable by other user groups and other citizen groups. And there it's really now I think a time where you can to think about how to bring in all those other citizen groups as well in the loop, in the development cycle of innovation. And we've been working for the last years really on this living lab concept in Amsterdam, and also I think it's in multiple cities and areas in Europe, to include citizens in both defining what the problem actually is that they want to solve, if you look at urban mobility. So giving them also a voice in defining the problems, and then also let them interact and feedback also on the potential solutions. And but this way of working is still something to be discovered and really optimized. I think at the moment it's also a couple of times it's really a nice intention, but really making it work is quite hard, because you are, let's say, increasing the complexity of the innovation process, because you're involving much more stakeholders and requirements and et cetera, et cetera. So it's really democratizing innovation in a sense, but at the same time, we see companies moving forward to, no, we want to be lean and agile, and we want to have short development cycles. So we want to reduce the complexity and the uncertainty in the process. And so these are different tensions that we, I think, have to solve, but that we have now the opportunity to involve citizens and also directly gather feedback, especially if you use the digital tools that are there, and especially if we have the digital ways of dealing with urban mobility now, like mobility as a service. You can have a very direct feedback loop between changes that you are doing in let's say, solutions, and how citizens are reacting to that. It's really amazing how quick you can organize this feedback, but it's something that we are still exploring. I really believe in this approach, but it's still we're not in the optimal model, I think.
Definitely lots to do there. And I mean, with the pandemic crisis, cities kind of became large-scale living labs, right? Where we can observe radical changes of mobility patterns. And so there are positive behavioral changes, and then there are also negative ones, so that pose challenges. So maybe, Anders, you were quite optimistic in your statements before. So what would you see as the main positive effects of this crisis in terms of urban mobility? And what should be done, and by whom, to make sure that these positive changes persist?
Okay. Well, I am an optimist by nature, so but just to mention two.
Always good to be.
One is that I have seen changes in mobility patterns, created by teleworking and more flexibility. So I'm pretty sure that when we go back to normality in many cities, the peaks will be less peaks than they were before. So that will help a lot congestion, and that will help urban mobility. So I think we have become more flexible, in general, which is very good. And then second, environmental awareness. I think the message about global warming, etc., it's in the hearts and minds of people. But the messages about clean cities, livable cities, etc., not so much. I think people sort of are used to live in cities that they are full of smoke or noises, and they are sort of okay with it. I think that has changed. Okay, at least here in Madrid, that has changed. People have, it was my case. Now, I remember the first day I could go out after the lockdown. I took my bicycle and went to the center of Madrid. There were nobody really in the streets, and I could smell the flowers. It was May, no? And I thought that was amazing. And a lot of people have commented that, no? When we came back to sort of normality. And so I think this awareness about the cities that we want is already there. And this and politicians are taking a good note of it. Okay, so now these new ideas about improving cities, even in introducing congestion charging, low emission zones, etc., I think they will be much better accepted now than they were before the COVID.
So thanks, Anders. I tend to agree with you, and I'm also quite a romantic when it comes to change of behavior. I think people can change their behaviors at any age, at any time, but we also do see some bouncing back to old behaviors. So maybe from Jaromír. So you already mentioned some challenges in the first part of this panel discussion, but now with regards to COVID and recovery, so what would you see as the main challenges there?
The main challenge, or the number one challenge that I see, is that people are still frequently scared of the safety of the public transportation, meaning that they are not willing to go back to the streetcars or the subway lines, and instead they prefer using their own cars. On the other hand, we have seen double the numbers of bicycle ridership compared to the last year. And in the city of Prague, we have never had a really strong culture of going to the work or to school by bike, because the city tends to be very hilly. And in the city center, especially, there are many old-fashioned cobblestone streets where it's not really easy to go biking. But now, over the past few years, we have had in the market, I would say 3 or 4 bike sharing companies present, not just the omnipresent lime kick scooters that are good for tourists, but not very good for locals. But the main challenge is still that many people believe that in order to move safely around the city, they have to travel by car, which is simply, in those numbers that we have seen being rising over the past 2 decades, is simply not possible. The ratio of cars to the citizens in Prague at the moment is that one car is really allocated to 1.5 citizens. So the ratio is not really sustainable. In other European cities, we can see it's much lower. And I hope for the future that people will rediscover the possibility of walking around the cities. We, as the city government, try to bring back many direct connections which have been closed for past decades, and reinvent new connections via building new bridges or roads that are easily passable and easily rideable by people on the bikes.
Thanks, Jeremy. We have 2 questions actually on exactly what you just said. But before we go to the questions, let's hear from Andres also on what he thinks about the post-COVID challenges.
Stefan, you want to comment maybe? Right.
Well, yeah, no. So post-COVID, so the most impact, if you look at the urban mobility system, of course, public transport operators have been really hit hard by the whole situation, and their financial situation is really something to start working already on. It's already been worked on, but it's really important. But the good thing is that I think we have seen that the change is possible. So and usually mobility behavior is very difficult to change. It's really routine based, and people like to stick to it. But due to COVID, we have seen that it's possible to change, and we have experienced the positive effects of this. And I think that's what also was said is really important, that we have a reference now where you can go for. I think the amount of funding that is now being created to, let's say, react on the impact of COVID and also use it for recovery. I think if you would really use this to partly improve infrastructure from a public transport side, but also making connections and just roads and bridges, as Jaromír was saying, for walking and cycling, you can really use this to restructure the infrastructure for urban mobility in cities in this time. It's really the time to do it. Also with respect to EV introduction and, let's say, improving charging facilities in cities. And I think this is the moment. This is really the time to do it. Otherwise, if we don't do it now, and I don't know when there will be this amount of additional funding be available for recovery.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think now is the moment we will have available funds through the European Reconstruction Fund, and then also there is an excuse. You always need I think Stefan mentioned this at the beginning. No, you need a crisis to actually change. No, and here we had one, so let's take advantage of it now. Because I think we need to make a step forward, because there will be another revolution coming. At least that's the way I see it, which is the autonomous vehicles, and we need to make sure that we are all ready for that. Okay, because that it's going to be really transforming, and I think cities, they need to have a clear model of urban mobility, and companies as well. We need to understand the rules very clear, so we can have a sustainable model in 10, 15, 20 years when the streets will be filled of autonomous vehicles.
Thanks a lot. So now let's give the floor to the questions from the audience. So one is on active mobility. So we've seen a bike revolution for some countries. I mean, for countries like the Netherlands, I mean, this has already been happening before, but for some countries, it's been a real cultural revolution, I would say. But now during winter time, and this goes especially to Jaromír in Prague. So Paulina says that winters can be quite cold in Prague. So people tend to use their private transport. So how do you make people actually use active mobility and ride their bikes and walk in winter?
That's a very fitting question. We as the city do not operate any bike sharing service ourselves, but we started really putting a huge effort in partnering with some of them if they comply to what we expect from a nicely behaving, excuse my French, nicely behaving bike sharing companies. And we are right now in the process of enabling all the citizens of Prague or visitors who are in a position of an annual subscription to be able to rent out the bicycle from maybe 2 or 3 bike sharing companies for free for the first 15 minutes, which appears to be a sufficient amount of time for most of the rides. Really, the average shows that most people would need to ride somewhere between 10 to 12 minutes within this context of the city of Prague to get to the nearest switching point to the subway line or to the train line, because we also have already nicely developed S-Bahn in German terms line system in the city of Prague. And not everyone is, just interested into driving their cars just because they think it's the best mode of transportation. But there are also people in the outskirts of the city that have their situation more complicated than the others because the connections are not very frequent, or they're simply afraid that they will miss the bus in the morning rush hour and come late to work. If we offer them an alternative by being able to ride a bike to the transit area, then they are in many cases surprisingly happy to try out a new service, and they start liking this. I've seen a few people myself that I would never guess to be, really avid sportsmen that pulled out their old road bicycles from a wardrobe or from a cellar, whatever, and started biking passionately for work. And now they're very happy that they called this idea, and they feel more fit and more confident in their everyday jobs, because nothing helps better, and that I can confirm from my own experience, than a morning exercise to recharge you for the upcoming day.
Okay, so this sounds very heartening. On the other hand, so we have another question here from Manfred Wacker, obviously being from Stuttgart, who sees a tension between citizens wanting change, wanting to fight air pollution, climate change. But on the other hand, we observe that year by year, there is an increase in private car ownership. So in the end, what do people want? And he puts it like nice speeches on things to be changed, but do they finally, only want to use their private car? So this is probably something that goes to all of you. So how can we solve that tension and make people, try out new options?
Yeah, I can just maybe shortly reflect on this. So of course, everybody looks always at Amsterdam. Oh, that's cycling, and it's also because it's a small city and easy and very well connected and so on. But actually, 30 years ago, and let's say 40 years ago, it was completely the other way around. We had big highways, even running right straight through the city, and everybody was using the cars. And that has been changed. And I think if you look at still private car ownership also in the Netherlands, for instance, is still quite high. It's been higher than many years, but the amount of trips that are being made with it is relatively low, especially if you look at the cities themselves. And within cities, the amount of trips made by the car are being reduced for many years. And on the other hand, shared mobility services, also shared car vehicle services, are not really taking off at the level that we were expecting, I think, 5 or 10 years ago. And there we see really the change of behavior is quite difficult. And lots of the things have to do with connectivity and accessibility of alternative modes. So let's say public transport and shared mobility or your own bike, and the comfort that is associated with this. But I think it's still happening, because I think also now during the crisis, people are really experiencing that using the alternative modes, alternative to, let's say, a car, can still be very comfortable. And we always complain about the amount of rain in the Netherlands, and that's why we don't like cycling. Well, actually also myself, and over the last couple of months, I experienced it's not raining that much. We think it rains a lot, but actually it's not raining that much when you're on your bike for 10 minutes. I really believe that public transport is a major role in cities and accessibility in cities. And I think in this time, really cities should take all the opportunities to improve that part, because that really makes it more feasible for a lot of people to leave their cars behind, and complement that with active modes and bike sharing or scooter sharing. I think that's really a way to go.
So that's a really good observation, Stefan, that it doesn't rain as much as we think it is. So I just bought a raincoat because I'm cycling more now, and I didn't get to use it, not once. So Anders, Jaromír, would you like to? So Jaromír, you kind of already commented on that.
I will not be commenting on the rain. It can be also partly due to the global warming that we see less rain, although there are varying opinions on that. No, I just wanted to add on what Stefan said, that we need to raise the culture of traveling on public transport. That's the key driver, at least from my perspective. A few years ago, there were politicians in Prague saying, oh, air conditioning on public transport, that is not the thing that we want to pay for. You know, you will be carrying around a lot of dead weight for the great part of the year. And now we can see, exactly due to global warming, that it's being in use from early April till the end of October sometimes. So it's already half a year. And this also goes for other elements or other key components of the public transit. People simply expect that if they travel on the subway line, they will have 4G or even 5G coverage on the metro, and they will be able to do their daily routines. I don't know, pay a bill or respond to a friend to whom they will not have enough time to respond while at work. Things like that. Maybe even order groceries for later their delivery when they're back at home. And this is also one of the phenomena that I wanted to comment on earlier, that people, while switching their individual behavior, also starting heavier to use the delivery services, which on the one hand you can see as a negative factor. But if you realize that many of those people would have to drive their own car to go to a big supermarket, or to go to buy new clothing or electronics equipment. And now you have the delivery companies with their super optimized, really hardly created routes where there are very little inefficiencies. I think this is also a positive thing in the end.
Yeah, I mean, just to comment, it sometimes it seems that there is like a tension or a contradiction between the public transport or the mass transit and cars, private cars or other private vehicles. No, but but I think there is room for two. The key is that they are the system is orchestrated, okay? Because sometimes, and just to add more public transport is not economically, doesn't make economical sense, and it doesn't even help other objectives like social inclusion, for example, or congestion. No? So we just need to think more on a holistic way, and try not to, in my view, put the private and the public against it, because at the end of the day, we are all members of the public and we are all private citizens, so we are all together in this. So that's my only observation. And then another one is that I really think the environmental problem is already solved in the sense that in a few years the economy, at least in the urban environment, will be decarbonized. I really think so. That's going to happen. I think the big problem that is coming is congestion. Big problem that is coming. Even it will be clean congestion, but we will have congested streets if we don't tackle that. And then second, social inclusion, to make sure that at the end of the day, everybody has access to any means of transport, and transport in a city helps people to go to work, to study, and to sort of fulfill their needs. No? So I think those two, they are more complex than the environmental one, that I think it's on its way to be solved.
Thank you, Andres, for that. And also, I mean, for EIT Urban Mobility, the mission is both to become green as a mobility system, but then also to create livable urban spaces. And if we have congestion, of course, I mean, this is detrimental to having livable cities. So yes. We will have challenges going forward, even if we achieve decarbonizing mobility. So there is a different question altogether here on the positioning of Europe in the sustainable mobility area. So that's a question from Pierre. So if we look at Europe versus rest of the world, what are the main features and assets of our innovation ecosystem for our continent to play a leading role globally in the field of sustainable mobility? So anyone has a perspective on that?
It's quite a challenge, quite a question.
Quite a question.
I think we have quite an interesting way of dealing with urban mobility in Europe. The types of cities that we have, and usually they are very, very old cities. Also, we have younger cities, but we usually have quite old cities with old infrastructures. We have to deal with that, and they all were built also in a time where focus was more on not so primarily car-driven mobility, but alternatives. So we can use that kind of legacy also to inspire other cities that might have been like Los Angeles, completely designed based on car movements. But I think with the industries that we have here and the close collaboration between cities and industry, and that's, I think, really a good way and base to move forward and come up with solutions that actually work in cities.
Okay.
We have all the ingredients.
I must agree with Stefan. I think we have a great advantage in the fact that many of the European cities are essentially cities of short distances, where you can commute easily if you just try to think about it a little bit. And we should stick to that. I know for some people it might not be the most comfortable option, because if I ask around, everyone would say that they want to have a lot of private space, a lot of parks, which is partly in collision with the interest to having the cities of short distances. But I can imagine that we can find the right balance if we put a little bit more effort into that.
So thank you, and I'm asked to wrap it up. So on that positive note, I would like to end the session. So thanks a lot. We have heard a lot of optimism there, many challenges as well, but hearing that we have all the ingredients in Europe to solve those challenges makes me very optimistic for the future. So thanks a lot for your great contributions, and enjoy the rest of the summit.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
It was a great pleasure.